The laughter echoed through the crystalline chamber, a symphony of alien derision that would haunt humanity for precisely 13 more minutes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her midnight blue diplomatic suit a stark contrast against the shimmering holographic backdrop. To the assembled galactic representatives, she appeared defeated, a lone human diplomat absorbing the collective ridicule of 12 advanced civilizations. What they didn't see was the nearly imperceptible data chip embedded in her left molar, continuously transmitting a complex quantum encryption sequence that was slowly unraveling the most secure communication networks in the galaxy. Humanity, boomed Krellex, the Zentari Archon, his prismatic body casting rainbow-like refractions across the Senate floor, continues to believe it deserves a place among civilizations that have governed the galaxy for millennia. Your species has not even achieved stable interstellar travel, let alone develop the sophisticated quantum communication networks we've maintained for thousands of years. More laughter, rippling, condescending, dimensional. Elena's right hand, casually resting on the podium, featured a quantum adaptive neural interface, a device so advanced that it would appear as a simple decorative ring to the untrained eye. Each millisecond of ridicule was being processed, analyzed, and integrated into a strategy that had been years in the making. The Cloraxian representative, a being composed of interconnected bioluminescent tendrils, added its critique. Humans are still resolving primitive conflicts on their home planet. What could they possibly contribute to galactic governance? What they didn't know was that those primitive conflicts had been carefully engineered, a masterful misdirection that allowed humanity's most brilliant minds to work in absolute secrecy. While the world watched territorial disputes and political theater, a different revolution was brewing. Elena's eyes, calm and impossibly steady, swept across the chamber. To the aliens, it looked like a gesture of defeated acknowledgement. In reality, she was mapping quantum resonance points, collecting microscopic data from each representative's communication implants. The Senate recognizes, she spoke, her voice deliberately soft and measured, humanity's current limitations. We withdraw our request for full representation. The words were a calculated surrender, each syllable laden with strategic intent. Krellex leaned back, his crystalline form vibrating with triumphant resonance. Wise decision, Dr. Rodriguez. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, your species might understand the complexities of galactic diplomacy. If only he knew. The quantum chip in Elena's molar was now completing its primary objective. Microscopic nanite clusters, disguised as routine maintenance protocols, were systematically infiltrating the most secure communication infrastructures of every species present. 13 minutes after the initial laughter began, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stepped down from the podium. To the Galactic Senate, she was a defeated diplomat. To the small team waiting in a nondescript research facility back on Earth, she was the first move in a game of galactic chess that would redefine everything. The real mission had just begun. As she walked out, a single message transmitted through her neural interface. Phase 1. Complete. Initiating adaptive infiltration sequence. The galaxy would never see it coming. Beneath the sprawling megacity of New Jakarta, a hidden network hummed with potential. The underground, as Elena's covert operation was known, wasn't just a communication hub. It was a living, breathing organism of resistance, composed of the galaxy's most marginalized species and humanity's most brilliant outcasts. Zarek Thax, a resonant from the gas giant Cloraxis 9, adjusted her quantum adaptive translation matrix. Her translucent tendrils moved with calculated precision across a holographic interface that would make most galactic technologies look like children's toys. Beside her, Marcus Chen, a disgraced MIT quantum physicist who had been laughed out of multiple research institutions, worked furiously on a prototype that could potentially rewrite the fundamental laws of communication. The Zentari think their quantum encryption is unbreakable, Marcus muttered, his fingers dancing across a holographic keyboard that seemed to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. They have no idea we're not trying to break it. We're going to redesign it entirely. Zura's bioluminescent tendrils pulsed with a pattern that, to the untrained eye, looked like random fluctuations. To Marcus, it was a complex language of agreement and strategic insight. The resonants had been victims of galactic marginalization for centuries, perfect allies for humanity's grand design. Across the room, a holographic map of galactic communication networks pulsed with potential vulnerabilities. Each blue line represented an established communication route, each red pulse a potential point of infiltration. What the Galactic Senate saw as a robust, impenetrable system, Elena's team saw as a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. First contact protocols are our greatest weapon, Elena announced, stepping into the underground facility. Her diplomatic suit had been replaced by a sleek, tech-integrated bodysuit that was part tactical gear, part advanced computing system. Every species has blind spots. The Zentari believe their technological superiority makes them invulnerable. That's exactly what we'll exploit. A holographic display materialized, showing the intricate power structures of various galactic civilizations. The Cloraxian diplomatic networks, the Zentari quantum communication grid, the massive bureaucratic systems of the Galactic Senate. Each was a complex ecosystem with its own unique vulnerabilities. We're not just building a network, Elena continued. We're creating a living, adaptive communication system that can transform itself faster than any existing technology can detect. Marcus pulled up a series of complex algorithms that seemed to dance and shift even as they were displayed. Traditional communication relies on fixed protocols. We're developing a system that doesn't just communicate. It learns, adapts, and evolves with each transmission. Zura's tendrils extended, interfacing directly with the holographic display. Her species' unique ability to perceive quantum fluctuations would be crucial to their plan. Where other species saw communication as a linear process, the resonants understood it as a multidimensional dance of information. The marginalized will become the architects of a new galactic order. Zara's translation matrix converted her bioluminescent communication into spoken words, not through violence, through information. Outside their underground facility, the galaxy continued its routine. Diplomatic missions proceeded, economic systems churned, and the Galactic Senate remained blissfully unaware that a revolution was being coded, one quantum byte at a time. Elena looked at her team, humans, resonants, and representatives from a dozen forgotten species. They were no longer just participants in the galactic system. They were about to become its architects. Phase 2, she said simply, begins now. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura's fingers hovered over a holographic interface that defied everything the galactic scientific community understood about technological innovation. Scattered across his laboratory, a converted deep-sea research station buried beneath the Pacific Ocean, were fragments of technologies that would rewrite the fundamental understanding of quantum computing, communication, and adaptive systems. It's not about copying, Hiroshi muttered to himself. It's about radical reimagination. Before him lay the dismantled remains of a Zentari quantum communication node, a device so advanced that most species would spend decades just trying to understand its basic architecture. But Hiroshi and his team saw something different. Where others saw an impenetrable technological marvel, they saw a complex system waiting to be completely reimagined. A holographic projection flickered to life, showing the molecular structure of the alien technology. Surrounding Hiroshi were researchers from disciplines that would have been considered incompatible just years ago. Quantum physicists working alongside tribal knowledge keepers, computational linguists collaborating with neurobiologists, artificial intelligence experts partnering with indigenous technology preservationists. The fundamental flaw in galactic technology, Dr. Aisha Okoi called out from her workstation, is the assumption of technological superiority. They've become so confident in their systems that they've stopped truly innovating. The team had discovered something revolutionary. The Zentari's quantum communication network, which they believed was the most advanced in the galaxy, had a critical weakness. It was fundamentally linear in its thinking. Complex, yes. Advanced, certainly. But ultimately predictable. Marcus Chen approached with a prototype that looked more like an organic sculpture than a piece of technology. Grown from a combination of engineered neural networks and adaptive biomaterials, it represented a completely new approach to communication and computation. Traditional computing is about processing, Marcus explained. Our system is about understanding. It doesn't just calculate, it learns, adapts, and anticipates. A holographic display showed the prototype's initial tests, where standard quantum computers would show a linear progression of computational processes. This system moved like a living organism, shifting, adapting, learning with each microsecond of operation. Elena Rodriguez watched from a secondary monitoring station, her eyes tracking every minute detail. This wasn't just about creating a technological advantage. It was about fundamentally reimagining what technology could be. The Galactic Senate believes technology is a tool, she said quietly to Zorak Thax, who was interfacing with the prototype's neural network. We understand it's a living system. The resonance bioluminescent tendrils pulsed in complex patterns, interfacing directly with the prototype. What looked like random fluctuations to an untrained eye was actually a complex communication protocol that merged quantum computing with biological adaptive intelligence. Hiroshi zoomed in on a molecular structure that seemed to breathe and pulse with its own internal logic. We're not just reverse engineering, he said, a rare smile crossing his typically serious face. We're creating something entirely new. The prototype suddenly came alive, not with a mechanical hum, but with a soft, almost organic resonance. Lines of quantum information began to flow in patterns that defied traditional computational models. It wasn't just processing information. It was understanding it. First contact protocols, Elena said softly, are about to change forever. Outside the deep-sea research station, the Pacific Ocean continued its endless rhythm. The galaxy moved on, unaware that beneath the waves, a technological revolution was being born, one that would soon rewrite everything they understood about communication, intelligence, and potential. The nanites were beautiful. If anyone could see them, they would have mistaken them for living art. Delicate, intricate networks of quantum adaptive molecules that moved with a purpose beyond simple programming. But no one could see them. Not the Zentari. Not the Cloraxian Communications Network. Not even the most advanced scanning systems in the galaxy. Deep within the primary communication hub of the Galactic Senate, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched through a quantum-encrypted connection as the first wave of infiltration began. Her fingers, seemingly idle on a holographic interface, were actually conducting a symphony of technological subversion. Target acquisition complete. Marcus Chen's voice came through a communication channel so secure it didn't technically exist. We're not just accessing their systems, we're rewriting their fundamental communication protocols. The nanites moved like liquid mercury, but with an intelligence that defied traditional understanding. Each molecular cluster was a miniature quantum computer, capable of adapting, learning, and transforming faster than any existing detection system could comprehend. Zara Kathax, monitoring the infiltration from a hidden research station, translated the nanites' progress in a series of bioluminescent pulses. They move like living thought, she communicated, not invasion. Evolution. In the grand communication chambers of the Galactic Senate, nothing seemed amiss. Diplomatic channels hummed with their usual bureaucratic rhythm. Economic networks pulsed with their standard transactions. The most sophisticated monitoring systems in the galaxy saw exactly what they were meant to see, absolute normalcy. But beneath that surface, a revolution was taking root. Elena watched as the first economic networks began to subtly shift. Not a crash, not a collapse. Something far more insidious, a gradual, almost imperceptible redesign of fundamental communication and transaction protocols. We're not destroying their systems, Elena explained to her team. We're teaching them a new language of cooperation. Marcus pulled up a holographic display showing the infiltration's progress. To an untrained eye, It would look like nothing more than standard communication traffic, but each packet of data was a carefully constructed piece of a much larger puzzle. The Zentari quantum communication grid, long considered the most secure network in the galaxy, began to experience microscopic changes. Communication pathways that had been rigid for millennia started to become fluid, adaptive. Security protocols that had seemed impenetrable began to develop unexpected flexibilities. Information is alive, Hiroshi Nakamura noted, watching the infiltration from his deep-sea research station, and we're teaching it to breathe in ways it never has before. A junior Zentari communication analyst might have noticed something strange, a momentary fluctuation, a microsecond of unexpected data flow. But by the time any potential anomaly could be flagged, it had already adapted, transformed, disappeared. Elena's quantum adaptive neural interface pulsed with a rhythm that was part calculation, part anticipation. Phase 4, she whispered, is about changing the very definition of communication. Outside the hidden research facilities, the galaxy continued its routine dance of diplomacy and commerce. Billions of beings moved through their daily lives, completely unaware that the fundamental rules of their existence were being rewritten, one quantum byte at a time. The nanites continued their silent work, not an invasion, not a destruction, something far more profound, a transformation. The first tremors of collapse began in the most unexpected places. On the crystalline world of Zentara Prime, a routine economic transaction flickered, just for a microsecond, into something entirely different. The chief financial administrator, Krelax V, blinked his multifaceted eyes as a standard currency transfer transformed into a complex web of interdependent economic pathways. Impossible, he muttered, his prismatic body casting fractured light across the holographic displays. But it was happening everywhere. In the massive transit hubs of the Cloraxian Economic Corridor, quantum communication networks began to shift. Not break, not crash, something far more terrifying. They began to evolve. Established communication protocols twisted, merged, and reorganized with a fluidity that defied every known principle of galactic technology. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from her quantum-encrypted command center, her fingers moving across holographic interfaces with surgical precision. Each movement was a calculated disruption, each data packet a carefully designed virus of systemic transformation. "We're not destroying their systems," she explained to Marcus Chen, who was monitoring global economic networks. "We're revealing their fundamental weaknesses." Zara Kathax, interfacing with multiple communication networks simultaneously, translated the systemic changes in pulses of bioluminescent communication. "Their rigidity is their vulnerability," her translated communication explained. "Adaptive systems are living systems." The Galactic Senate's primary communication hub began to experience the first true signs of comprehensive breakdown. It wasn't a crash. It was a metamorphosis. Communication channels that had been fixed for millennia suddenly became fluid, adaptive, unpredictable. A Zentari communication analyst named Vexnar was the first to truly understand the scale of the transformation. What had been a perfectly ordered communication network was now a living, breathing ecosystem of information. Established protocols dissolved. Rigid hierarchies became dynamic networks. "It's like the entire system is learning," Vexnar whispered, watching in horror and fascination as communication pathways that had been immutable for thousands of years began to reshape themselves. Hiroshi Nakamura, monitoring the global systems from his deep-sea research station, allowed himself a rare smile. "Technology is not a tool," he muttered. "It's a living organism, and we're teaching it to breathe." The economic impacts were immediate and profound. Trading systems that had been stable for centuries began to reorganize, not collapse, transform. Currency valuations became dynamic, responsive, alive. Economic hierarchies that had seemed immovable started to dissolve and reform in ways no predictive model could anticipate. "Chaos is just complexity waiting to be understood," Elena said, watching the global networks pulse and shift. On 100 different worlds, in thousands of communication centers, beings began to realize something fundamental was changing. Not a war, not an invasion. Something far more profound, a complete reimagining of how systems could function. The Galactic Senate's emergency communication channels erupted in a panic of translated messages, confusion, fear, incomprehension. What is happening? Became the universal question, and humanity was about to answer. Marcus Chen looked up from his monitoring station, a glint of something between excitement and revolutionary determination in his eyes. Phase 5, he said quietly, is complete. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Galactic Senate's war room erupted in a cacophony of panic and desperation. Holographic displays flickered with cascading system failures, each attempt to reassert control more futile than the last. Krillax, the Zentari Archon, stood at the center of the chaos, his crystalline body pulsing with a mixture of rage and fear. "Prepare the quantum suppression protocols," he commanded, his voice cutting through the technological din. But humanity was always 3 steps ahead. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the Senate's counterattack unfold from her quantum-encrypted command center. Every defensive measure the aliens launched was already anticipated, already neutralized before it could even fully manifest. Marcus Chen's fingers danced across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with its own intelligence. "They're using a linear defense strategy," he muttered. "It's like watching someone fight a living organism with a hammer." The quantum suppression protocols, a technological marvel that had maintained galactic power structures for millennia, began to deploy. Massive energy fields designed to neutralize adaptive technological systems powered up across multiple communication nodes. In any other scenario, these protocols would have crushed any technological threat. But these were not ordinary circumstances. Zarek Cathax, interfacing with multiple communication networks simultaneously, translated the unfolding conflict in complex bioluminescent patterns. "They fight the future," her communication explained, "with the tools of the past." Each suppression protocol was met not with resistance, but with adaptation. The human-designed nanite networks didn't fight the energy fields. They absorbed them, learned from them, transformed them. Hiroshi Nakamura monitored the global systems, a rare smile crossing his typically serious face. "Technology is not a weapon," he said quietly. "It's a language of understanding." The Senate's most advanced warships began to move, preparing for what they believed would be a decisive technological counterattack. Massive quantum cannons powered up. Dimensional warfare protocols activated. The most sophisticated military infrastructure in galactic history prepared to crush what they saw as a technological insurgency. But each movement was already anticipated. Communication networks that had seemed to be breaking down were actually reorganizing. Economic systems that appeared chaotic were finding new, more dynamic equilibriums. Military protocols that looked compromised were actually being rewritten into something far more complex. Vexinar, the Zentari communication analyst who had first noticed the systemic changes, now stood in the Senate war room, watching in a mixture of horror and fascination. "They're not destroying our systems," he said quietly. "They're teaching them to live." Elena's quantum adaptive neural interface pulsed with a rhythm of calculated anticipation. "This isn't about winning a war," she communicated to her team. "This is about proving a fundamental truth about technological evolution." The Galactic Senate's most powerful weapon, its belief in its own technological superiority, was now its greatest vulnerability. "Adaptive systems," Marcus Chen explained, watching the global networks pulse and shift, "are living systems, and we're showing them how to truly be alive." Emergency communication channels across the galaxy erupted. Confusion, fear, but dawning realization that something fundamental was changing. The counterattack was failing before it had even truly begun. Krillax looked out over the war room, his crystalline form now seeming brittle, fragile. The tools of galactic domination were transforming before his eyes. "Phase 6, Elena Rodriguez said quietly, is complete. The galaxy would never understand what had just happened, but it would never be the same again. The hidden research facility beneath the Pacific Ocean had transformed. What once was a cutting-edge technological hub now resembled a living, breathing strategic command center. Holographic displays pulsed with quantum adaptive interfaces that seemed to breathe with their own intelligence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, a conductor preparing for the final movement of a complex symphonic revolution. "We're not just preparing for a confrontation," she explained to her team. "We're preparing to fundamentally redesign galactic governance." Hiroshi Nakamura worked on the final calibrations of what could only be described as a quantum communication matrix, a device so advanced it blurred the lines between technology and living organism. Beside him, Marcus Chen integrated adaptive AI systems that could predict and reshape communication protocols faster than any existing technology could comprehend. Zara Fax, her bioluminescent tendrils interfacing with multiple communication networks simultaneously, translated the team's preparations into a complex language of quantum potential. "Preparation is not about power," her communication explained. "It's about possibility." The marginalized species they had recruited over months of careful networking now formed the most sophisticated intelligence network in galactic history. Species that had been relegated to the fringes, the resonance, the quantum adaptive tribes of the outer rim, the algorithmic collectives, were now the architects of a new galactic order. "The Galactic Senate believes in rigid hierarchies," Elena said, studying a holographic projection of galactic power structures. "We understand that true governance is an adaptive system." Across multiple worlds, hidden research stations came online. Each was a node in a complex, living network that defied traditional understanding of communication, governance, and technological potential. What looked like isolated facilities were actually part of a complex, breathing organism of strategic potential. The quantum adaptive nanite networks they had developed were no longer just a technological tool. They had become something more, a living communication system that could reshape itself faster than any existing detection method could comprehend. Marcus Chen pulled up a final systems check. "We're not just infiltrating their systems," he explained. "We're teaching them an entirely new language of cooperation." Vexinar, the Zentari communication analyst, who had been quietly observing and understanding the transformation, had become a critical asset. His insights into the existing galactic communication systems provided the final pieces of the strategic puzzle. The most powerful weapon, Vexinar had explained during their final strategy session, is not technology. It's the ability to see beyond existing limitations. The final preparation was not about destruction. It was about transformation. Hiroshi's quantum communication matrix began to pulse with a rhythm that seemed to exist between mathematical precision and pure potential. "Systems are not machines," he muttered. "They are living organisms waiting to be understood." Elena looked across her team. Humans, resonance, marginalized species, reformed galactic analysts, a collective that defied every existing understanding of potential and cooperation. "We are not conquerors," she said quietly. "We are evolutionary architects." The holographic displays began to synchronize, a complex dance of quantum potential and adaptive intelligence. Communication networks that had been rigid for millennia began to reshape themselves, preparing for a transformation that would redefine everything. "Phase 7, Elena Rodriguez said, her voice a quiet symphony of strategic potential, is complete." The galaxy held its breath, unaware that its fundamental nature was about to change forever. The moment of transformation was nothing like anyone had expected. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a conquest. It was a collective awakening. The Galactic Senate Chamber, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy and technological arrogance, now pulsed with a new kind of energy. Holographic displays that had once represented static power structures now shifted and breathed like living ecosystems. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, no longer just a diplomat, but an architect of a new galactic paradigm. Krellax, the Zentari Archon, whose crystalline body had once radiated condescension, now appeared almost transparent, not in weakness, but in a newfound understanding. The very beings who had laughed at humanity were now witnessing a transformation they could never have imagined. "We did not conquer," Elena spoke, her voice resonating through quantum communication networks that now span the entire galaxy. "We invited evolution." Vexinar, the Zentari communication analyst who had been instrumental in understanding the transformation, stepped forward. His translation matrix now carried a complexity that went beyond simple language. It conveyed entire ecosystems of thought. "Governance is not control," he translated, his bioluminescent communicators pulsing with a rhythm of collective understanding. "It is adaptation." The changes were profound yet subtle. Economic systems that had been rigid for millennia now flowed like living rivers of potential. Communication networks that had once been controlled by a few now became adaptive, collaborative spaces of shared intelligence. Military hierarchies dissolved into cooperative problem-solving networks. Zara Cathax moved through the Senate chamber, her resonant tendrils interfacing with the newly transformed communication matrices. What had once been separate systems were now interconnected, living organisms of collective potential. Hiroshi Nakamura's quantum communication matrix, the technological heart of their revolution, had become something beyond a mere device. It was a living bridge between different ways of understanding, of existing. "Technology is not a tool of domination," Hiroshi explained to the assembled representatives. "It is a language of mutual understanding." Marcus Chen pulled up the final systems overview. The numbers told a story far beyond simple data. They showed the birth of a new kind of galactic cooperation. Species that had been marginalized for millennia now found themselves at the center of a new collaborative framework. The marginalized had become the architects. Elena looked across the transformed Senate chamber. The rigid lines of power had dissolved. In their place was something far more complex, far more alive. Not a human empire, not alien subjugation, but a truly collaborative galactic ecosystem. "We were never trying to replace your systems," Elena explained. "We were trying to help them breathe." Around her, representatives from 100 different species began to understand. The transformation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about reimagining what was possible. Krellax, his crystalline form now more fluid, more alive, approached Elena. The gesture was both an acknowledgement of defeat and a recognition of something far more profound. We laughed. He communicated through the new quantum networks. "You showed us how to understand." The Galactic Senate, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy, was now a living, breathing network of collective potential. Humanity had not conquered. They had invited the galaxy to evolve. "Phase 8, Elena Rodriguez said quietly, watching the new networks pulse with potential, "is complete." The galaxy would never be the same again. And that was the point.